Hello, good evening, good morning, wherever you are on this planet, on this real or fake planet. That's the topic of today. Do we live in a simulation? So, first off, want to put a definition around our topic today. Maybe that's a good place to start. Hello, Andorini. Hello, Ida. Okay, what does it mean to live in a simulation? So I Googled it. There's lots of different results, and I'm just going to kind of read a couple of these just to get like a general sense of what we're talking about. The simulation hypothesis proposes that what humans experience as the world is actually a simulated reality, such as a computer simulation, in which humans themselves are constructs. There has been much debate over this topic, ranging from philosophical discourse to practical applications in computing. So, first off, it's fun to talk about these things. It's fun to philosophize. It's fun to, sit around a table or hang out with friends and just kind of, theorize and get lost in these ideas of, the edge of outer thought of our existence. Now, I must say that for myself, off the bat, I don't spend a lot of time in that place. It's great when you meet somebody, on the same wavelength, and you can just kind of share different perspectives. But generally speaking, the reality that most matters, whether there's a projector screen behind it or not, isn't so important for our life, for our expansion, for our evolution, for our self realization. There is a level of reality that is most practical for us, most useful, most natural to our design, I would say. And we can get into that in just a little bit. And yes, I hope to bring some people up on stage for this one. It's a fun topic. Now, there's a reality that I often call the subjective reality. That is the interpreted reality. Something happens, and then we, based on our previous conditioning, traumas, fears, projections, expectations, we interpret that reality, and then we experience, that subjective reality. That's not a healthy reality. That's not a balanced reality to be living from. And it's a very small reality. You're attaching yourself to every little thing that happens, good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant. It doesn't really matter. You're always chasing your happiness. You're attached to your thoughts. You react to your feelings. That reality is very small. It's very narrow. It's very unfulfilling. It's unhealthy. Because it leads to all kinds of mental, emotional, spiritual health issues. Leads to feeling small and lonely and believing in scarcity and all those things. That's not good reality. Now, so much of what we talk about on these calls is about learning to observe and witness that reality, expanding, moving into a bigger place, becoming a bigger person, a bigger container within which life happens. So that's a much better reality. The reality of what is often called consciousness or awareness, living life from a place of awareness. And in there, we can see the inner workings of how life is teaching us lessons all the time, how really the best approach is to take on the mindset of a student, You don't have to know it all. You don't have to plan it all out. You just have to flow with each moment as it arrives, see it as it is, accept it, take action from there. It's a simple reality, and it's most conducive to your well-being, and also most conducive to the flow. And this flow is really the state of being part of the greater current, like the stories you hear about experiencing yourself as a drop versus experiencing yourself as a drop that's part of the ocean, part of something much greater. That's where we thrive as beings, experiencing ourselves as part of the greater current. That's where we participate in life and become facilitators of life and co-creators of life. That's where it all kind of falls into place and makes sense. Not just philosophically, but practically. And so this practical place is what I'm most interested in, and living from, and teaching about and writing about, because it has the most immediate impact on the quality of our life. If we can tap into that reality, that's where it feels like it's a sweet spot. Now we can zoom out even further and discuss, things that are on the outer edge of thought, such as the simulation theory, or we can, go even beyond that, and that, to a place where it's just complete fantasy, if you will. And that's fun too. There's a place for that. In a way, sometimes you have to nurture that muscle in order to stay really open and creative. And even if you might not be able to go that far out practically, it's good to work that muscle of being able to see and imagine anything. Imagination is super powerful. There's really no difference between our imagination and what we think is reality. As soon as we start imagining something, as soon as we start to focus on something, it becomes reality. That's the power of manifestation. That is a whole topic on its own. So, what really is reality? So simulation theory has probably become more and more popular the more power our computers develop. And we're starting to see, even just at the consumer video game level, this is not top secret labs that have rooms full of computing power. This is just commercially produced video games that are starting to look so real and so indistinguishable from real life, organic life, or movies that are entirely produced through CG, and the character generation is so precise and lifelike that we can't tell the difference often between a generated image and a real life person. So there's these indicators as technology grows exponentially that, at some point you can't really tell if something is organically real or if it's a simulation. So just simply based on observation, you could say that, if this continues, then you could quickly, not too far off, see a time when you can't distinguish between a real experience of the physical world and a virtual one. You see all these goggles that deliver virtual reality experiences, so you don't have to even go anywhere, and you can venture out and walk around and run and do all kinds of things just virtually in your headset. These sim games have been around for a long time. I remember in my childhood playing these the The Sims and other video games that were based on building little cities and building little communities and societies, and you just grow them and they start to become self-sufficient, and then you check in on them. And then there's there's actual games where there's entire worlds and galaxies where you can spend money, virtual money. So all of these things blur the lines between what is the physical organic world and then what could be the virtual world. And it's getting very close to feeling like, well, if we can create these simulations, these very real life feeling simulations, then could it be that we're a simulation? And that just this is an endless video game with all these stages. You need to get from one to the next. Again, most important is that when we have real issues, mental health, physical well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, that going into these philosophical extrapolations is not that helpful. In fact, I would say that is just going back into one's head. And we talk about that all the time, the damage that does. And so the dissociation from your real life, and this is kind of a real problem for upcoming generations, is that they spend so much time in the computing world that somehow their whole system gets wired in a weird way, in a funky way, where they never learn to run backwards because they're just not out and about enough. And the relationship between their brain and their hand doing tactile things is no longer developing the same way that it used to. The brain and the hand need to develop together. They're not separate. Hand being your representative of your body, to really be in your body and experience things, and how that then relates to your inner truth, being able to feel that when something resonates and doesn't. This is all part of your wiring as well. And when you're just sitting in front of a screen all the time, your natural guidance system doesn't develop as well and as detailed and as thorough as it might if you were actually playing around in nature and touching the earth, that many of us grew up with and that you rarely find today. So we got, these are things to be mindful of, and there's lots of indicators and lots of possibilities of carving your own path. You just have to be more conscious of it, more aware of it. I wasn't allowed to watch TV. Video games came in much, much later. Even going to the movies. I mean, I was well into my teens before any of that was allowed at my house. And the television had a padlock on it, so you couldn't turn it on. And everything was supervised, 1 hour a week. And I usually, when I misbehaved, that hour was yanked very quickly. So even back then, there was much debate about people sitting in front of just TVs too much, let alone these kind of all-consuming devices that we have in our pockets. And I would probably attribute a lot of me being on my path today to not being so consumed by media as a young person. I just had to find ways to, play Legos and invent sports and run around and get dirty and ride my bike and create things, be in a constant state of play and creativity. That was, out and rough and tumble play. That's how you learn to socialize, being around other kids. And, that is what led to, I think, a very robust attitude towards life and a kind of a inquisitiveness and a natural disposition to look at myself whenever something felt off and think of and reflect on, what's changed recently, what have I been doing differently, and then, figure myself out. Just because you're more in this playful problem solving, in tune with your body, in tune with your mind kind of state. And I think that's helped me over the long run, stay more inquisitive and so forth. But back to the simulation, there were some interesting points in the initial search result. One coming from, I'm going to read this to you, one coming from quantum physics. That's a little more compelling if you're going to theorize about these things. So I'll read this piece. Perhaps the most supportive evidence of the simulation hypothesis comes from quantum physics that suggests that nature isn't real, quote unquote real. Particles in determined states, such as specific locations, don't seem to exist unless you actually observe or measure them. Instead, they are in a mix of different states simultaneously. So looking at the smallest possible particles, just like you have in the Hadron Accelerator in Switzerland, where certain behaviors of protons don't happen unless somebody's watching, and watching with an intention to observe specific behavior. So that specific behavior then only happens when somebody is nearby with the intention of observing it. So what does that say? Well, it certainly points to the power of manifestation, that you're really literally moving particles through your intention. So whatever your tuning is, whatever your alignment is, you are affecting the physical world, the so-called physical world, through your intention, through your vibration, through what you want to see. And so for those, I think that manifestation is woo-woo or, far-fetched. It's more than obvious that when you set your intention on something, when you start, and the example I mentioned is car shopping. So you set your heart on a particular model, and but you're still in shopping mode, but you've kind of narrowed it down, and that's the type of the color and the type of car you want. Suddenly you see that car everywhere, and before you never saw it. So as soon as we focus on something, we see it. We see it everywhere. And the idea of setting our intention on feeling a certain way is the same way, is that the particles around us start to align to reflect that reality back to us. So that is essentially manifestation. And you just have to be able to hold that frequency long enough. This is the key. And very few people actually talk about this in context of manifestation. That if you hold your frequency long enough, then the matter around you starts to align towards your intention, towards your desire. But if you can't hold your frequency long enough, consistently enough, then you'll flip into a different spectrum, different spot, and send out different signals, different ideas, and different desires and needs, and then the matter around you start to get confused and mirror this new desire back to you. But because our monkey mind is always jumping every few seconds, there isn't enough time for the reality around you to really manifest in a noticeable way. So it's happening at the smallest particle level. But for bigger, tangible, visible things to fall into place, you more consistently need to hold your frequency. And this is where meditation comes in, is to be able to focus and keep your attention on anything really. We practice with our breath, because our breath is universal. It's always happening now. You can't focus on your breath that's happening tomorrow or yesterday. Your breath is always in the present moment. And so when we put our attention on that, it pulls us into the present moment. And learning to keep your attention there, it's just practice, just like anything else. You want to get good at it, got to practice it. It won't happen any other way. And then that focus ability, we can then apply to manifesting our best life, because we can hold the frequency of who we are, of what we know our truth to be, of how we want to feel more consistently and for longer periods of time, across time. And then it's much more likely that that matter starts to align with a more consistent frequency, and then those things, the physical manifestation of your desires, start to appear. So that's pretty straightforward as far as I'm concerned. And is it nice to know that, yeah, there's people doing research and they see that the matter's acting and responding to our intention? Of course, it's nice to back it up. But all of this is just knowledge. It's just getting more into your head, it's my opinion. And it has the potential to distract you and just keep you lodged in your mind again, thinking you know things. That deeper intuitive knowing doesn't come from thinking. It doesn't come from facts, and there really are no facts. You can surmise from, well, if matter just aligns itself to your desire, and so whatever you think, whatever your intention is going to become real. Well, that sheds an interesting light on research and archaeology and philosophy and all of these areas, science and also the philosophical sciences, about what's really real. And if it's always the intention of the creator, there's a good example of a male archaeologist finding a long bamboo object in a cave, interpreting it as a arrow or other weapon. And then a female archaeologist walking into a cave and finding a similar object and interpreting it as a flute or an object for homemaking. And suddenly a whole story and a whole theory gets spun around that, and then that winds up in history books or in museums. And it's all just perspective of whoever did the research, whoever funded the research, whoever had the creativity to spend time on extrapolating from one little finding this bigger theory about something, about life. So these are the things that if you follow your intuition, you'll just know these things from a deeper place, not from an intellectual, mental place. And this deeper knowing doesn't require this scientific proof. It's just much more obvious. and much quicker. We talk about our own path of least resistance. If you're, the blink response can be instant, and there's even research on that and books written on that. Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, definitely worth a read, on how the vast majority of the time that's the right move to make, the right action to take. The decision that you instantly arose in you winds up to be the best choice. And you could think yourself into exhaustion and never arrive at that conclusion. Or even if you arrive at it, you're now so tired and almost disillusioned that kind of the whole fun of the living and the experience of moving forward and choosing depletes you when you live through the mind. So it's always something to be mindful of, is not to get too caught up in the philosophy. It can be a fun thing occasionally. And if you have the luxury, meaning you've taken care of yourself in every other way, and to be able to sit and ponder our existence to that kind of outer edge, maybe that's a little bit of a reward right there for having done the inner work. But that comes first. The inner work comes first. It really doesn't matter what's behind all of this. Now, I must say from personal experience that I've had a handful of experiences that point to a very mechanical nature of what's behind life. Through years of meditation, certain experiences come up through years of being in very quiet and still environments. Occasionally an experience or an insight came along and would reveal some of the nature of life to me, just at least the way I experienced it at that moment. And some of it does very much feel like, some kind of generated, some kind of mechanical, some type of a programmed reality. And love, for example, is also just a frequency. And it is the core frequency of life. That I've experienced that multiple times. But it's also just a frequency. So if we're programs and we experience this frequency of love and it makes us feel really good and it heals us and fixes us and puts us into this really yummy state, that still doesn't take away the possibility that it's just part of a program. So, being open to all of that is maybe of value, not getting too stuck on one particular version of it. But it's all just words pointing to something. Even when we say God, we're pointing to a higher power. When we say computer simulation or aliens, we're pointing to a higher power. So what we call these things isn't so important. It's much more important to recognize that which we're pointing to, and to get lost in debate about, at the word level of what each word means, and attach ourselves. It's this or that. Then that doesn't feel good. It doesn't help. This is where arguments start. Divisiveness starts. And that's never where these types of conversations should lead. And a lot of that is happening in the world where people are getting attached to their definitions of the words, and then fighting over these definitions. And that is keeping a lot of people stuck at the surface. This is a surface issue. Definitions change all the time. your own definitions change over time. I play this exercise game with my classes all the time over more than a decade. I ask, everyone, what does, and I'll use a simple phrase such as, what does "I'll call you back in a minute" mean? And if there's 30 people in the class, you'll get 30 different answers. Some vastly different answers. And so if a simple sentence like that can be interpreted differently, endlessly, and then you can only imagine how ineffective and vague language really is, and that we shouldn't get caught up on different words and their meanings. It's much more important to be able to tune into where are these words coming from that this person in front of me is using. What's their motivation? What is driving them? And that gives context to the words, shows you what their meaning is. You call this empathy. But this is a skill that I remember being shocked by how few people have it. A lot of people run around and they think their definition of a particular word or sentence, and then from there you can extract that to worldview level, is the one that is real. It's real to them, but they can't imagine that someone else might have a different definition. And so whenever they hear anything, they hear it in their version, their definitions of those words, and interpret it that way, never considering that the person speaking those words has a different background, different education, different conditioning, and different emotional state, whatever it might be. And not considering that context for what is being said, you're going to miss most of the conversation. You're going to have very hard, friction-filled conversations because you're not budging from your state. You have an inability to see things from the other person's perspective. So that's where the trouble starts. We have to be able to put context to things. And this context is always tuning into the frequency of the other person, their state, their emotional, physical. If you're not in a good mood, we can tell by ourselves. If we're not in a good mood, we have certain thoughts. If we're in a good mood, we'll have completely different thoughts. So everything requires context. And this context is really being able to tune into what somebody else is feeling, what state they are in. If you're just in your head and philosophizing all the time, then you're going to miss out on this empathic part. You're just kind of arguing around words and definitions. So that's not a fun place to be in. Not a productive place to be in. There are always more important things. But if we can tune into what another person's constitution is, it doesn't matter what topic, that's still a worthwhile activity, even if it's just talking about the weather, to connect at that level with someone. It almost doesn't matter what they say. You can be talking about the weather or simulation theory, and it's still, you're connecting. That's the most important part. It's not about getting hung up on who's right and who's wrong. That is division and separateness. But just to be able to hear with an open heart and an open mind, and just purely listen and be there and hold space for them to express themselves. I always talk about recognizing the need somebody has when they come to you, and holding space for that need. Let them say what they need to say. You don't have to inject yourself. You don't have to run everything through your own filters, and then kind of respond in a almost self-defensive way, because you're really just trying to validate your own beliefs and protect your own truth structure, which is all just mental. Now, that stuff is not real. And so much of our journey of self-realization is letting go of all the parts of you that you're not. It's not about changing yourself so much. It's about just letting go of who you're not. And that's most of who you think you are. So that's why it's so hard to do the work on yourself. You're so identified with all these parts that are not you, not your true you. And your whole worldview runs through these parts and these attachments, these characteristics of who you think you are. So that letting go of that stuff, even though that stuff is causing strife, it's causing stress, it's causing disease, it's causing friction with the world around you, it's so hard to let go of it because you think it's part of you. I've seen this time and again in private practice, but you can also ask any experienced therapist of people who reached the place where they finally identified an issue, the core issue, and they're facing their healing. Right? They're at that place where they just have to take that one extra step, and then they will heal from a particular trauma. And they can't do it. They regress. They go back. They step away from it because they feel like they would be losing a part of themselves, which is true to some extent. The part they've identified with, the broken identification part, the I'm not enough part, the I'm a failure, I'm blemished, I'm insufficient part. All of those thoughts, as unhealthy as they are, if you're identified with them, becomes really hard to let go, even though there's healing waiting on the other side. So that is the real stuff we should be focusing on. That's the real stuff of that brings true healing. And it's really it's remarkable how difficult it is to live in misalignment, because we're basically afraid of being in alignment. We're afraid of being healthy because we're so identified with our unhealthiness. That's probably the biggest challenge of life right there. And as long as there are issues there, it's much more important to focus on that than on whether or not we're a simulation. It doesn't matter if we're a simulation or not. It matters that things work a certain way. The world runs a certain way. There's certain, call them laws in place. I always talk about, if you follow the rules, if you recognize the design of life, who or what is behind that design of life ultimately doesn't matter. It's fun to philosophize about it. In some ways, we're just too limited to go there and recognize that, because we'd have to kind of go outside of our own system, and at that point, it's just pure conjecture. But really, what matters is to recognize how life is designed to be lived, and then to live by those rules. And when you live by those rules, you get rewarded instantly. If you make decisions that are in alignment with your inner truth, you feel good, you feel great instantly. It rewards you. If you make decisions that go against your nature, go against your alignment, you feel bad instantly. So it's an instant feedback system that we're in, which is really cool. We don't have to wait for Judgment Day or anything like that. But literally, if we follow our bliss, we're getting positive feedback that we're on the right track. And if we feel lost and disoriented and we dread when you're waking up the next day to do whatever, and that's a pretty strong sign that we're in misalignment, and we got to make some changes. And if we keep making those misalignments, keep living in misalignment, then we get sick, our body breaks down, our mental health deteriorates. So it's just, that's our guidance system right there. How do you feel? And keep following the parts that feel good and that feel right and that resonate. And that will take you towards the path of health and well-being and creativity and eventually being of service, a role model for others, and inspiration. That's the stuff that matters the most. Okay. Do we have any comments? Please put them into any questions in the comments box. Anyone who wants to come on stage and talk about this, just say something in the comments. I'll bring you up. Otherwise, we'll proceed to our meditation today. Get us back down to what matters, being grounded in ourselves, in our inner truth, observing our thoughts, disidentifying with our thoughts, observing our feelings, knowing that we're not our feelings, and that reactivity is what's keeping us stuck. Those are the things that matter the most. All right. I know there's a delay, so I'm going to hang on for another minute here. Probably the most compelling piece is the one about matter moving, changing, shifting shape when we set an intention. And not to get lost in the philosophy of that, but more to recognize that physical reality really starts to adapt and align itself with our thoughts. It's doing so all the time. Live in a world that is alive, that is full of energy. And all of this energy is always interacting. And if you put out a certain energy, then the world around you will respond to that energy. And it's all about finding your truth so that you can vibrate a certain way, so that you can manifest the world reflecting who you are and what your purpose is, and not to manifest just flippant thoughts, I want to be rich and famous or anything like that, but rather getting to know yourself first, truly understanding what you're here to do. There is a blueprint inside. Each and every one of us has a unique one. And in collaboration with that, manifesting a world around you that supports that reflects that. And that's really the most solid way to go. All right, let me check if anyone wrote in. There are all these numbers, people, scientists who crunch probability on it's 25% more likely that we are a simulation just based on numbers, things like that. So this is a deep topic. No questions. All right. Well, I'm happy that everyone just wants to meditate and be present. So let's do that. We're going to do some thought awareness. It's the most important thing that we can develop, our awareness muscle around our thoughts. That's the one thing that will change your life for the better, is that you have the choice which thoughts to engage in and which ones to let go. Everything else is, fun, philosophizing. But until you have the freedom to choose which thoughts to engage with. You're not really free. You're at the mercy of thoughts coming along and taking your attention away and getting lost in rabbit holes and not really being here and alive to experience the real reality, the tangible, organic reality in front of you, because you're always lost in thought. To not be able to listen to your best friend and hold space for them because you're running everything they say through your own mental filters, looking for what you think is right and wrong and always validating your own beliefs. That's an unhappy state to be in. It's a hard place to live from. So the best thing you can do is, just like any other thing to practice, is to practice becoming aware of your thoughts. So we're going to do that right now. Do a 15-minute meditation. Finding a comfortable position. Focus your attention on the incoming and outgoing breath at the entrance of your nostrils. Breathing in through the nose. Breathing out through the nose. Notice the touch of your breath as it enters and exits your nostrils. And let the detail of your breath pull you in closer. Closer into the present moment. If your breath is shallow, let it be shallow. If your breath is deep, let it be deep. If it's more in the left nostril, let it be the left nostril. If it's more in the right nostril, let it be the right nostril. or if it's in both nostrils, let it be both. Notice the temperature of the incoming breath. Notice the temperature of the outgoing breath. Notice if there's a difference. Notice the pace of the incoming breath. Notice the pace of the outgoing breath. Notice if there's a difference. Notice the length of the incoming breath. Notice the length of the outgoing breath. And notice if there's a difference. Notice the pause at the end of your inhale. Notice the pause at the end of your exhale. Notice the transition. And whenever you find that your mind has wandered, simply notice it. And without frustration, without dismay, but with full acceptance, bring your attention back to the incoming and outgoing breath at the entrance of your nostrils. Natural breath. Normal breath. Observing your breath as it is, without wanting it to be different. And when you feel ready, you can gradually blink open your eyes. Relax your body. Notice your environment. Notice yourself in your environment. Notice the energy in your body. Notice your aliveness. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining. Wishing everyone a great week ahead. Until next time.